Yes, it is.
Welcome. My name is Steve Bishop, and I'm a vice president here at the Leadership Institute, and I'm substituting for Morton this morning, as Morton is presently on Leadership Institute business in Korea. And so he's about halfway around the world. Anyway, welcome to the Wednesday, March Wake Up Club Breakfast. Thus far, in 2006, the Leadership Institute has already trained 1,155 students in 40 job seekers through our employment placement program. And you all have before you our 2006 school schedule. Please take a minute to review the upcoming schools and consider attending one of them or sending a friend to one of our programs. And right now, I'm going to, Rachel Dendu is going to lead us in the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Rachel grew up in the Midwest and attended Bethel College in Mishawaka, Indiana. I think I got that pretty close. After working as a tennis professional for 2 years, she returned to graduate school in Florida State University and earned her master's in international affairs in 2004. She began working at the Leadership Institute last month as a membership assistant. Rachel?
Would you please stand with me? Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you so much for the opportunity to be together here this morning. We thank you so much for Congressman Pence and for the time that he is so graciously sharing with us. We ask that you will just continue to bless his work and his staff as they continue to advance principles that we believe are honoring to you and that are going to help to bring your kingdom closer to being here on earth. Thank you so much for the wonderful food that you have provided for us this morning. Remember not to take anything for granted, even our daily bread that you provide for us. We ask that you'll bless and protect the soldiers that are in harm's way overseas, watching over them. We love you so much. Please follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Change in our program rather than after our programs update because he has a meeting on the Hill at 9 o'clock. So after he gets done speaking and answering, because the program won't be over. Anyway, right now, Christy Meade, who is from Indiana, is going to introduce the Congressman. Christy is a native of Indiana and received her BA in creative writing from Purdue University in 2004. And while at Purdue, Christy was involved with groups including Sigma Kappa sorority, college Republicans, and 2 campus leadership programs, organized groups. They put it on 2 pages. I guess I can't handle it. She was a University Conservative Club Action Network and the Conservative Student Publication, the Purdue Independent. After graduation, Christy came to work for LI as a CLP field rep for the Mid-Atlantic and currently works as a development associate. Christy?
Thank you. One honor it is for me to introduce to you this morning not only a fellow Hoosier, but a man who first describes himself as a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican. Congressman Mike Pence was first elected to represent Indiana in 2000. Currently, he is a member of the Judiciary Committee, the International Relations Committee, and the Agriculture Committee. Congressman Pence has authored 3 bills, and his achievements show as he was named Man of the Year by Human Events in 2005. In September of 2004, Congressman Pence was unanimously elected as chairman of the Republican Study Committee. Yesterday, the RSC released its top 10 legislative agenda for 2006. Just to highlight a few items on the agenda. Number 9, pass protections for religious freedom, such as the Pledge of Allegiance, the 10 Commandments, and religious expression in the public square. Number 5, pass the Marriage Protection Amendment to ensure that marriage, the union of a man and a woman as husband and wife, is not redefined by activist judges. And number 1, to make the tax cuts permanent, including the marriage tax penalty and the death tax, and pass fundamental tax reform. With Congressman Pence as a conservative leader, our nation will be brought back to its founding conservative principles. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Mike Pence.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you to the Leadership Institute, to Steve and Rachel. It is a wonderful knowing the international reach of the Leadership Institute that they would find 2 Hoosiers to welcome me this morning. Helen, I'm just really honored to be here. As I was sharing over coffee this morning, I am the beneficiary of the Leadership Institute's contribution to this country. My very first campaign manager in 1988 had graduated 1 month before I hired him from the Leadership Institute here in the wind tunnel of Clarendon. And we lost that campaign, but I'm not holding that against him. That was mostly my fault. But he demonstrated to me what an extraordinary value there is when young men and women enter the political process from the framework of principle. And will bring that extraordinary energy and enthusiasm that we only seem to get from the young to the American political process. But Helen, thank you for joining us this morning. Give our world traveler our warmest regards. Morton is a mentor and a friend and a real inspiration to me. And having been married 21 years, I actually know where he gets all that inspiration. So thank you for your leadership as well. Good morning, everyone. I was just blown away to come to the Leadership Institute this morning. Literally got out of my car and was almost blown away down the... I mean, really, that rushing wind going by the front of the building, you know what I'm talking about here? Yeah. I mean, really, my hair was wet when I got out of the car, and it reminded me, I was mentioning to Chris here at the table, it reminded me of when you're walking into the House of Representatives and the sheer volume of hot air that is in there comes exploding out of the doors. It's very much like a domed stadium if you're a sports fan. It's just great to be here. And I want to share with you a couple of serious thoughts, if I can, this morning about where we are as a movement. I had the privilege of speaking at CPAC a few weeks ago. I'm speaking in Colorado this weekend. And I want to share with you just a few musings, and then maybe, as Steve and I talk, maybe a little time for questions before I have to run off to the Republican caucus meeting. I do want to acknowledge that today I'm the warm-up act for your next wake-up breakfast, whose speaker has actually slipped into the room. Dr. William Dennis, another Hoosier of great note, famously of the Liberty Fund, highly published, a great conservative mind, will be addressing you in a month, and came over to, I said, wow, Bill, you're a Hoosier, your father was in Congress in my seat before me, that you would fly across the country just to hear me speak this morning. And he said, actually, I just came to check out the venue. But Bill Dennis's father, David W. Dennis, was a member of Congress from Indiana of extraordinary principle and conviction. And they don't fall too far from the tree in that family, and I know that Dr. Dennis is going to be a real treat for you next week. Great to see you, Bill.
Good to see you, Mike. You're the same sort of guy.
Well, it's high praise. You know, when we look at the Republican movement today in Washington, D.C., a movement that was really minted about 25 years ago, right now. I mean, it was just a matter of maybe 6 weeks ago, 25 years ago, that a Midwesterner who, slummed in California for a while, raised his right hand and took the oath of office and brought the principles of traditional American conservatism in the mainstream of American politics. Ronald Reagan's, I think, third national victory would be the 1994 elections that saw those same values reach their ascendancy on Capitol Hill. But as we stand in 2006, I think it is incumbent on us, a quarter of a century past the beginning of that movement, to ask where we are in that movement today. And to ask whether or not there ought to be some course corrections, because I offer that there is much need of that. But let's talk for a second, if we can, about what we have accomplished. It is extraordinary when one thinks of what, even in the last 5 years, United Republican governance in Washington, D.C. has affected. We have managed in many ways to deliver on the promises the American people voted for in electing that actor and in electing this majority. And there's no diminishing those things. We've dismantled and scattered a network of terrorists within our country in the wake of the worst single-day attack in our nation's history. We've liberated millions of people across the globe from oppressive and murderous regimes, and the American soldier has brought the promise of democracy and freedom to millions who have never known it. And make no mistake about it, I just spoke to Howie, who is with the Army here in town, maybe traveling with me. I'll be making my 4th official trip to Iraq. Men and women, we are winning the war in Iraq. Whatever else you think about, it looks on television. The men and women in uniform are fighting day in and day out, and freedom is winning in Iraq. And our movement gets credit for that. We cut taxes again and again. President Bush has put the brakes on leftist activist courts with sound appointments at every level of the federal judiciary, including the appointment of 2 strict constructionist justices to the Supreme Court of the United States. And we have ended the horror of partial birth abortion. These are not insignificant accomplishments, and we do well to reflect on them and remind ourselves of them and take appropriate pride in that. But I want to ask this morning, what about the other promises central to our movement and our nation's values and liberty? The promises that said, we'll cut spending, we'll reduce the size and scope of government. On these promises, I would offer that it's been, in the last 5 years at least, all sizzle and no steak. I likened at CPAC a few years ago to the conservative movement to a tall ship with a proud captain and an accomplished crew that was veering ever so slightly off course into the dangerous and uncharted waters of big government republicanism. And I still believe that today. Staying in that metaphor, I just can't help but feel the ship's galley just keeps sending up giant platters of pork and platitudes and promises and never-ending pleas for patience to the passengers on the deck. You hear it here at the Leadership Institute, and those of you who are leaders in this movement longer than I've been involved hear the complaints. We hear we're working on it. We're told we can't do it without a majority. When we see the fact that even though this Congress has spent more than twice what even this administration has requested for in each of the last 5 years, more than $380 billion more than the President has requested to be spent, we're being told, hang on, we'll get to that. One of my mentors, former Majority Leader Dick Armey, probably said it best in his last year in Congress. He said, quote, "We do the things we ought not do so we can be reelected to do the things we ought to do but never get around to." I want to say this morning from my heart, we are not as a party bereft of ideas, we are bereft of will. The will to even consider taking on the challenges of an $8 trillion national debt and the real scandal in Washington, D.C., which is runaway federal spending with hard choices and hard decisions that derive from a conservative heart. Whether it's called compassionate conservatism or big government republicanism, I say with conviction, after years of record increases in federal spending, more government is now the accepted Republican philosophy in Washington, D.C. Men and women, we are in danger of becoming the party of big government. For the sake of our party, for the sake of our nation, we must say here and now to all who would lead our party in this new century, the era of big Republican government is over. And you can applaud if you agree with that. I want to say this morning, if we're still on the wrong course, it's because we choose to be. Either because we truly don't see the urgency of a course correction or because we lack the will to get it done. And let me say, the American people get it. It's the politicians who really don't. You know, I'm back home in Muncie, Indiana. Folks see the disconnect between what we've been saying and what we've been doing. Far too many of the things we said we'd do if we ever got control, we haven't gotten around to doing. You just heard Christy talk about the ROC's agenda we published yesterday. These are basic, mainstream, common sense, conservative ideas. Yet they're revolutionary in Washington, D.C. Not just making tax cuts permanent, but tax simplification in the form of either the fair tax or the Army shall be flat tax. These are common sense, mainstream ideas at home, but they're radical in Washington, D.C. Passing a constitutional amendment that says that marriage is defined forever as the union between a man and a woman. That's a mainstream idea in Muncie, Indiana, but in Washington, D.C., don't bring that up. People get it. And also, there's no escaping the fact that some of the things we have done look more like the work of a Democratic Congress. I mean, since I arrived in Washington, D.C., that we've seen the creation of the first new entitlement in 40 years. We've seen more than a 50% increase in the Federal Department of Education and national testing in the 4th and 8th grades. Of the like that a Republican majority rejected from President Clinton time and time again in the 1990s, we embraced in No Child Left Behind. Record deficits and an $8 trillion national debt. Not to mention a pork barrel culture that saw more than 15,000 earmarks in the last Congress alone, including public funding for the indoor rainforest in Iowa, a weather center for Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog, in Pennsylvania, and of course the bridge to nowhere. Our ship is running out of fuel, our crew is running out of patience, and men and women, we're running out of time. Every day, I would submit, we sail further into the dangerous waters of big government republicanism. We run the risk of finding ourselves someday shipwrecked on the road to serfdom. If we have to look over our shoulder to see the shining city on the hill, we are sailing the wrong way. Now, I know some of you, not Morton, not Helen, but some of you want to abandon ship and head for the lifeboats and let the ship hit the unforgiving reefs of the midterm elections. That'll show them. But anyone who thinks a Democrat Congress would do any better on any of these issues has, as we say back in Columbus, Indiana, another think coming. In my 5 years in Congress, despite the fact that I was one of those guys in there fighting big government education funding and big government entitlements, and I'll tell you what, I have never seen the Democrats bring a single bill to the floor that wasn't bigger and more intrusive and more expensive than anything we ever thought of on our worst day. I mean, I was one of 25 members of Congress who held out for 3 hours to vote against the creation of a new entitlement. The Democrats are all running around the country saying, yeah, we voted against that too. Terrible bill, terrible. Well, the only one, us conservatives voted against it because it was too big. Added $8 trillion in unfunded obligations to the national government in the next 30 years. The Democrats voted against it because it was too small. I mean, men and women, it's... I mean, if you think Nancy Pelosi looks surprised ordinarily, I can't imagine how surprised she would look the day they brought a bill that actually cut government spending. So look, the answer is not mutiny. It's not time to abandon ship. We just need a course correction. What do you do when you get a course correction? Well, you get your compass out first, and you figure out which way is true north. Now, conservatives know what true north is. Leadership Institute knows what true north is. We know that government governs least, governs best. Government should never do for a man what he can and should do for himself. That as government expands, freedom contracts. And conservatives know that societies are judged by how they deal with their most vulnerable, with the aged, the infirm, and the unborn. I mean, we can look at the compass, we know what's true, but it's not enough just to know what's true and talk about it at rallies and think tanks. It's time to put it into practice. Therefore, I say we come to another time for choosing. And I want to say particularly to the young people in the room, your generation faces an age-old choice. It is a choice between limited government and tradition and this, what I call the siren song of the central planner, who says that big government is good government, if it's our government. It is one of the most pernicious lies of all human history. And our movement faces it today. We're really at a crossroads in America. Are we committed to the ideals of limited government, fiscal discipline, and traditional moral values, or not? And if we are, we must act accordingly. And we've done it before. I open today with where I'll close and take any questions that you have for a few minutes. We've walked this path before. Some of you lived it. 25 years ago, when another son of the heartland came east with the ideals of our founders, we walked into years of prosperity and increased liberty and security and an affirmation of American values. It's almost as if Ronald Reagan's address to CPAC in 1975 was written for us this morning. Let me read some of those words. Quote, he said, quote, a political party cannot be all things to all people. It must represent certain fundamental beliefs which must not be compromised to political expediency or simply to swell its numbers. I do not believe I've proposed anything that is contrary to what has been considered Republican principle, he went on, and then he closed. It is at the same time the very basis of conservatism of which I speak. And it is time to reassert these principles and raise them into full view. And if there are those who cannot subscribe to these principles, then let them go their way. Close quote. President Reagan described not a big tent Republican Party. He spoke to an America where 20% of Americans identified themselves as Republicans. When he was done with that harsh message, 40% of the American people said they were Republicans. He showed us the path not just to a shining city on a hill, to a bright American future, but he showed us the path to a durable governing majority. And this is what I say to particularly the young talents and minds in the room. If you think there is a choice between leading from the basis of conservative principle and having a majority sufficient to govern, that is a false choice. The very career of Ronald Reagan, the very story of the conservative movement, the very story of the Leadership Institute and the impact of its thousands of graduates is a story about the success of principle in America. Because at the end of the day, it's like Lou said to me this morning when he slipped me a card. We are, in fact, as Lou coined, we are the common sense party. We are the party that, like as Thomas Paine did when he wrote a pamphlet during the American Revolution of the same title, we are the party that speaks not to Republican values, but to American values. I mean, I got a degree in American history, and so actually the greatest joy of my job is giving tours of the Capitol. Really, any day of the week you can find me. After I go beat up on leadership and go get beat up by the press, and I usually give a tour to 8th graders. I love it. Passionate about it. And I think there was a time in American history where these principles of limited government, the idea of America's place in the world as a beacon of freedom and hope and opportunity, a commitment to free market capitalism and economic freedom, and a commitment to traditional moral values, that these were what were the common denominators between the major parties in America. They argued along the margins, But both parties embraced what was in the Constitution, the vision of American governance, which as Ronald Reagan understood and articulated better than anyone else in my lifetime ever has or will. It was a vision of limited government in this document. That was common denominator stuff in American politics until somewhere around the New Deal. And the other party walked away from it. And they started down that road to serfdom. And they started down a road that departed from those American ideals. And so I want to leave you this morning with a challenge that we have work to do, men and women. We have challenges to face. But it will not take courage to do it. I've seen courage. I'm going back to look courage in the eye in Iraq this spring. No one shoots at you if you're working in the conservative movement in a campaign out in Iowa. There are no snipers in the balcony in the House of Representatives. It does not take courage to do these things. It does, however, take will. And a will that is born of an understanding of the rightness of our cause. And also born of the understanding that we are the repository of the truly American ideals. And that if we do not forcefully advance these ideals of limited government, fiscal discipline, a strong defense, economic freedom, private property, and traditional moral values, that not only will those issues falter, but this experiment will falter. And so I leave you with that challenge. Rise to it. Understand your place in history. And thank you very much for the opportunity. Got a couple of minutes here. The lady in red in the back there. Great, good morning.
The United States contributes 25% of the monies for the United Nations. When is Congress and our government going to get starch in their backbone and say enough is enough and get out of the United Nations? We don't want to lose our sovereignty.
Well, let me say that as the co-author of the Hyde-Pence UN Reform Act, I share your profound concern. I gently correct your numbers. We actually, when you add in all the various ways that we get money into UN programs, that number is closer to 32 or 33% of UN activities are funded by the American people.
I was being conservative.
I knew you were. I knew you were. Look, I co-authored a bill with Henry Hyde that we passed out of the House of Representatives, which essentially we call UN Reform with Teeth. It basically says to the UN, it gives them about 5 criteria. It says, get your act together, change your internal accounting, establish real and serious controls over the behavior of your personnel around the globe. We need to end the practice of terrorist states being on human rights commissions and all the, you can call my office, get a copy of it, or go to our website. But we give them a very short event horizon for them to do that, and then we cut our dues in half as a starter. I really believe, now there's some opposition in the Senate to that. They don't mind us calling for reform, but they really don't want us tugging on the purse strings of the UN to facilitate reform. But I tell you, we have no other leverage over the United Nations other than the power of the purse. I mean, we are, it's Gulliver's Travels and the Lilliputians. I mean, we are on the beach and they are tying us down all the time. And unless we just pick up our behemoth wallet and threaten to walk away, I don't think we're going to even get their attention. And so we're urging the Senate to take some tough actions to pass UN reform with teeth. But if they don't, and if these reforms don't happen, I've said publicly, I think we need to seriously consider the formation of maybe a new organization of societies committed to freedom and private property and the principles that we share and cherish. not a world government, but just a new forum, a new vehicle to go and have conversations at. The United Nations, people say that diplomacy failed in the run-up to the war in Iraq, and America failed. But if anybody failed, the UN failed. And they passed 16 different resolutions, and they didn't even take themselves seriously. And the United States of America and its courageous President George W. Bush said, you know what, we're going to take it seriously. When we put deadlines on this murderous dictator, Saddam Hussein, and in the last 24 hours is being confronted with his murderous regime and having to listen to the facts being presented in court, President Bush said, we mean what we say and say what we mean in America. And the UN doesn't. So I'm moving in your direction on that, but we're trying to push that institutions along, but I'm not really especially optimistic. Yeah, Lou.
Yeah. Mr. Pence, I think we're losing the propaganda war at this time. And mainly, I guess, it's because I live in the Washington area, and it's hard to get out of it. I know as I go to the hinterlands, it's a little different. Could we get President Bush to do the fireside chat type thing? Because I believe, just as you mentioned what Reagan did, I think that Bush has the potential to do somewhat similar, but he's got to be able to get out there and get above the main media push, which is always negative toward us.
I certainly would encourage the president to do that. He is. I've gotten to know the president a little bit, the last 5 years. It's a real kick in the head for a small-town guy. And he's a deeply committed Christian man. I have total confidence in the sincerity of his faith. I said on Fox News Sunday a few weeks back that President Bush is conservative, but he's not a conservative. And everybody in this room knows what I mean. He's a small C conservative. He's a Christian man. He believes in pro-growth tax policies and America's place in the world, strong defense, and right to life. But he's not somebody that gets up every day and thinks like Morton Blackwell does. He just, No Child Left Behind, he still thinks was a good idea. Nobody else in America does. I was one of 25 to vote against that. And I'm not sure we get 25 votes today in the House of Representatives. Thank you for noticing. But I love the guy. I find him to be very compelling to talk to. But there is a difference between the George Bush that gets up in front and the guy you meet. And your recommendation, Lou, is an intriguing one. I just wish we could package and get out in the media the real guy, because he is such a guy. It's impossible to dislike him if you encounter him and know him. And the great challenge is, of course, when FDR did his radio addresses, everybody had one radio that looked about like this, and really nothing else to do Saturday morning, so you take a little break from the farm, you turn on the radio, and listen. Now we've got like 5 zillion channels, and maybe they'll cover, maybe they won't, maybe it'll be on, maybe Dancing with the Stars is on, so I'm not going to watch the president. And I used to work in radio and television, and I'll tell you, the diversity of our choices in media tends to wage war on the clarity of our message. And that's a reality. Do I have time for one more, Steve?
Right.
Yeah. Get myself in trouble. Yeah. How about, I've already talked to you. Back to the room, one of these young people.
Yes, thank you for coming and speaking here. I really appreciate it. I have a question about immigration. How can our party come up with a tougher immigration policy while bringing in those that are softer on illegal immigration?
How did it finish
How
this?
can we get a commentary on how we can deal with immigration within the issue itself, within our party?
Yeah.
Because members of our party were easier on illegal immigration, so this was what we're talking about. What can we do to bring a consensus?
Well, I think actually the House of Representatives in December passed a bill that Jeff Flake and Tom Credo both voted for, which is like, worlds colliding. And it really was what I like to call a close-the-door bill. When I think of immigration today, my grandmother was Irish immigrant, and They had a house on the south side of Chicago on Honorary Street. And I'm told that if anybody needed a meal, my grandmother's house was a place where my mother said people came. You know, people would just show up on the back door because they'd say, you can get a meal. You know, just go to the back door. There's always, she said, we had strangers at the table a couple days a week. And would see them once, maybe twice, never again. But, and I used the analogy. I said, what if my grandmother had, you know, this guy had come in the house and they fed him, and he was a wonderful guy, he couldn't have been more grateful. And she went upstairs to tuck my mom and her brother to bed and came down and realized that he'd come back into the house and done all the dishes. Okay, and put them up in the cupboard. And my grandmother was very impressed with that, and so the next day the same thing happened. She went up, tucked the kids in, and he came back in the house and did all the dishes, but this time she left $1 on the counter. Okay? Now let's say this went on for 20 years. And they never spoke of it between themselves, in my analogy. And she's leaving the back door open, and he's coming in, and he's doing it, and there's $1 on it. How fair would it be for my grandmother to call the police on the 20th anniversary of him doing that? Someone breaking in my house? I've never told them they could come. Well, I've been paying them, but I never told them they could do it. You know, when I look at this country in the last 30 years, men and women, you know, it's hard for me, as a grandson of an immigrant, it's hard for me to completely vilify people who've come into this country when it's not that we've left the door open, we've kicked it down, we've paved it, we've got the IRS to issue numbers so they can pay their taxes, we leave them alone, we don't arrest them, we tell them please, and the corporations go and get busloads of people and bring them here, and then we say we are shocked that you people have come into our country. How on earth could you do that? And so the first thing to me is, number one, get tough with the border security, get tough with employer enforcement, and shut the door. Shut the door. Establish fundamental integrity in our immigration laws. And then once you shut the door, I'm going to say where the consensus lies. Once you shut the door, and we can close the border, and this is the most powerful, wealthiest country on the planet. We can close our borders with technology and fencing and patrols. We can do that. Once you shut the door, then I think the American people are prepared to have a conversation about a manner whereby we can deal with the problem we helped create. 8 to 10 million souls who otherwise obeying the law and paying taxes and staying out of trouble and going to church on Sunday. And I mean, you know, but we can't get to that as a nation, and we don't have any chance at consensus about that until we shut the door. And I was presented yesterday with a proposal that I find very appealing in terms of people going back to their home country and making application there, and people are asking me to author a bill, and I said, you know what, I'm not even interested in considering what to do until Congress shuts the door. Because when I'm back in Muncie and I'm in Richmond and I'm in Anderson, the people in that community, when I say to them, if we close the border, then can we talk about, you know, dealing in a humane way with these people? People, sure. But they're very quick that, you know, it's this common sense again, Lou. It's people out there going, but you know what, I get it. If you don't have the door shut, and you come up with some kind of a thing, guest worker, amnesty, whatever, it's you know, it's going to be a tsunami coming into the country, and as it has been before in our nation's history. So if we shut the door and allow a period of time where employers know you cannot anymore be complicitous with violating the law, we'll give you a fair notice, and then the meat cleaver's coming down, and then we get serious about border security, then I think the American people are deeply compassionate people, and we all, with the sole exception of our Native American cousins, you know, don't get too uppity about people not being from here. Most of us are not, right? So, I mean, we are in every sense a nation of immigrants, some involuntary, with our African American brothers and sisters, but the majority voluntary immigrants. And so, understanding that and embracing that and being ready to do that, we can make happen. But your profound question is a wonderful one, because it is how do we get there, and where we get there is we don't try and go there until we, in my grandmother's analogy, we shut the kitchen door, and we end this from happening on a voluntary basis, and we give people confidence that we are a nation of laws, and we enforce those laws. Thank you very much. This has been very good.
He has to go, but as a token of our appreciation, we give you this Adam Smith tie. Oh, great. And we just thank you very much for coming. We thank you for your remarks, and we appreciate it very much. So.
See you soon.
The Leadership Institute, as Morton told you a month ago, has come into a legacy from Stephen Wood, which has improved our financial condition immensely and has enabled us for the first time to become debt-free and to pay off and to have a reserve fund. Since the last breakfast, we have our Form 990, which is public information, and our audited financial statement, which we are, if any of you have computers, you can go on the computer, it's on our website. You go to our website, you go to About Us, and then from About Us you go to Finance, and it'll say there's two places you can click, one for the 990 and one for the audited financial statement. But if any of you don't have computers and would like one, after we're done, if you'd like to stop up here, you can pick up either the 990 or the audited financial statement. It's similar information presented maybe in a little bit different way. There are two things that I'd like to mention about it. One is that we increased our fund balance by 67% due to that legacy. The second thing is that 2.1% of our revenue comes from school tuition. So you can see how important to us our donors are. If we didn't have donors, we really wouldn't have anything, because 2.1% isn't going to go very far of our. So, but we're dealing with what young people, and most young people don't have much money. So anyway, these will be available for you. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that we had something happen recently that is going to help the Leadership Institute, and we hope that some of you will be able to participate with us. As all of you know, Morton is a visionary, and part of his vision is to have a CLP group on every college campus in this country. There are 2,530 college campuses. We presently have about 700 CLP groups, so we have a long ways to go. However, one of our donors from Texas has offered us a $1 million matching grant. Now, in order to get this money, we have to raise $1 million from our other donors, and he will match us as we are able to prove that we have raised this money. He will match the money. But what this is going to enable us to do, and we believe that we will be able to raise that $1 million and get the matching grant, is going to enable us to have 60 field reps out starting new college campus groups this fall. Last year we had 27, so this will be a doubling of that. And the normal starting a field rep, we expect to be able to start 10 groups. So that would be 600 additional groups. That would almost double what we have by the end of this year. So it's really exciting, and I just would like to tell you that starting today, we're going to be sending out in the mail requests from our donors. And I know that some of you here are donors, some of you aren't, some of you are employees, some of you are younger people who aren't. But to our donors that are here, you will be receiving a letter in the mail that will talk about CLP and will tell you about this matching grant. And so, any of you can help, we would really, really appreciate it. And now I'm done. Well, maybe a real quick story. Mort and I are about the same age. Well, I'm a little younger. I'm 3 weeks younger than he is, so he's an old guy and I'm a little bit younger. Anyway, about a year ago, 2 years ago, he did my annual review for me. Okay, and I went home to my wife and I said, "Honey, I got good news and I got bad news." Morton did my review today. Good news, he gave me a raise. The bad news, he said, Steve, I'd like you to stay here and work with me until you're at least 85. So, I guess I can't retire. But I have made that commitment to Morton that as long as I'm healthy and as long as he still wants me around here, I'll stay. So, all of you who are employed, all you young people who are employed, you have to put up with me for a long time. Unless Morton gets tired of me. Anyway, Chris Steele is going to come and do a programs update, and Chris is the director of core schools here at the Leadership Institute. Prior to his position, he was a field representative for President Bush in Michigan. Each of the counties that he was responsible for voted for the president. Yay, Chris. Steele was a graduate of Rutgers University. Chris?
One person cannot make a difference. One leader can. And we just saw that from the likes of people like Congressman Pence, of what one leader can do. I want to tell you about one big training session that we had where we trained a lot of conservative leaders recently. We've heard a lot of talk about CPAC. And at CPAC in February, your Leadership Institute trained 308 students in 2 days. That is the record for as far as we know. Definitely, above that. 308 students in 2 days. It's remarkable. We trained students in public speaking, everything about how to do public speaking, grassroots communication, blogging. We've taught many people, we taught 72 people how to be more effective bloggers. It's how people are getting out information, and we want to make sure that we as conservatives are on the cutting edge, and that's where we continue to be. Campus activism, and finally in our Effective Television Techniques workshop. I want to point out one of our students, one of our 308 students. We had a young man by the name of Jeff Beatty, who was one of our students at our blogging school. Does that name sound familiar? People right here are in the Jeff Beatty room. If you come up to our roof, it is the Jeff Beatty roof. Jeff Beatty is in his 80s, and he still was coming out to our school, filling out our blue sheet, and wanting to learn about what we're doing. It's very exciting to know that. As I've said many times here to many people who have come to these breakfasts before, ladies and gentlemen, we here at the Leadership Institute, we're in the victory business. We teach people, we teach conservatives how to win. And in those just 2 days, we taught 308 students how to be more effective. They were from all over, colleges around the country. We had people come up from Brazil, which is just a little bit outside the United States. Just a little bit. But they came up to hear about how we're doing things. Other countries, as Morton's in Korea, other countries look to us and say, whatever it is you guys are doing, we want to know. And they'll come from all over. We had a school at the end of January, the International Leadership Training School, where we had 21 different countries represented who have never, ever had the information that we at Leadership Institute are teaching of being effective grassroots activists who are affecting change right now in their home countries for a lot of issues that you and I care about. One more leader I'd like to talk about. In the back of the room over here, we have a young man by the name of Jim Eltrickham. Yesterday was his last day at Leadership Institute. So, of course, since it was his last day at Leadership Institute, he's again back here today. And that's how he is. And he's another one of our leaders that we've trained, and now he's going out into the world to do bigger and better things with the training that he's done here. So if you get a chance to see Jim, wish him well in his future endeavors. But these are the type of people that we're training. Conservative leaders who are making a real difference right now. Not next year, not 5 years from now. We're going to have an impact then, but right now. And thanks to your help, we're doing that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, and please join us on Wednesday, April the 5th, 2006, for the next breakfast. It'll be featuring Dr. William Dennis of Atlas Economic Research Foundation. And any of you who would like a tour this morning, Christy Meade is doing double duty. Not only did she introduce our speaker, but she'll give any of you a tour if you would like. So after the breakfast is over, which is basically right now, if you'd like a tour, come up and see Christy, and she'll be happy to accommodate you. Thank you.